Welcome back to the neighborhood. We hope you enjoyed the effin' game swap that we did last month, but that is over now. So on this episode, we're going to be talking to an expert about one of the biggest names in gaming, World of Warcraft. Welcome to the podcast where three longtime friends talk about video games from the average gamer's perspective. My name is Andrew Kimball.
I'm Dylan Wren.
And I'm Aubrey Sommer.
And
we are your friendly neighborhood gamers.
So like I said before the intro, we are joined on this episode by an author from Wowhead, Khazak, or is it pronounced Kazakh?
It's usually pronounced Khazak, but I don't think too hard about it because I read it infinitely more times than I hear it.
So Joe Sommer is here. He's joined us to talk about World of Warcraft. We touched base with Joe on our previous show, Level Playing Field, which Joe is a consistent voice on to talk about WoW, but...
Well, I was a founding member of Level Playing Field.
I'm sorry, do we need to run that back?
Yeah,
okay.
Take it from the top.
Joe was a founding member of, and that episode did pretty well, and that's not the only reason that we're dipping back into that well, but a lot of stuff has happened in World of Warcraft since then, and a lot of stuff has happened with Joe and his relationship to World of Warcraft since then. So we thought it would be a good idea, kind of this one little transitional in-between episode before we kick into our sort of end-of-the-year content that gets consumed by... Game of the Year conversations, predictions, Fantasy Critic, all that stuff is pretty much set in stone. We had one slot here that we needed to fill, and we couldn't think of anything better. There was a recent expansion to World of Warcraft, and Joe has elevated his position in that community, so now is the perfect time to check in with him, see what's going on with World of Warcraft, talk about a little bit about the rest of our experiences with it, because we haven't on this show yet, and we all have played it to some degree, although it gets further and further into the past the longer that time rolls on. But Dylan is here. You've heard his voice briefly. Aubrey is also here. This is...
And now you've heard my voice.
Not the first episode that we've had you both on since Aubrey became a full member, but... The last episode that you were both on was like the big group Frank Stone episode. So, anyways, World of Warcraft.
Yep. It's still here. It's here for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
This is the big 20th year. And they came out swinging big innovations such as you can play the hit classic Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness right now on Battle.net.
Oh, man.
I don't understand that reference.
If anyone's really jonesing to play a game that's, I think, older than I am, you can do that.
You know what else is almost 20 years old? Hurricane Katrina.
Yep.
That's a weird way to look. Measuring like WoW against Katrina.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was in that kind of window of life, I guess, that we picked up the game, because it would have been a few years after, like in the mid-aughts, that like me, Aubrey, Dylan, I think Dylan kicked off the trend. My dad, we all got super into WoW for a little while there.
Yeah, it's just weird to think that like around that point was when WoW was like brand new, like it wasn't an established thing.
Yeah.
Well, I remember going to Dylan's house and he was like running around in the game or whatever, and just being like, this looks kind of interesting, and him explaining, yeah, you can play this with anybody, and it's like all these other people on screen are actual people. And because I mean, at the time, online gaming was nowhere near what it has become, and so the idea of WoW was what was so exciting, because the gameplay was, pretty straightforward, pretty basic.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time that Dylan introduced it to me, and I went home and was like, oh, I can scrounge up $15 a month to play this thing.
Yeah.
It was Burning Crusade was just ending, so it was still pretty early, but it was a little bit past that like initial start.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 years into the run when we all kind of hopped on, because I started playing in 2005. So I think WoW officially launched in like 2004.
I think so. I mean, yeah, it's the 20th.
Well, yeah, 20
year.
years. That makes sense. You just said that. I should have done that math. So
I feel like
math.
I feel like it had to be around 07-ish whenever I got into it, because it had been a few years.
Yeah. Wait, when did Katrina happen?
It was
05.
Yeah.
I remember like booting it up the first time I played to make my profile, which was a little bit later than y'all, but not by too much. And it was the Burning Crusade animatic with like Illidan and the whole "you are not prepared" thing.
Yeah.
But I also feel like that it was transitioned very quickly to
Lich King.
Lich King. I was like, the frozen Ice King guy.
Yeah.
I started playing during a Halloween event, because I remember like everything being all skeletons and
out.
pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns and stuff, and like this being my first real MMO experience. Like I'd played a little bit of Pirates of the Caribbean online, or like Disney Toontown online or whatever, but like this being the real first experience, it was like getting dropped into an MMO when they were still really fresh and new, and dropped into like a holiday event. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And on the cusp of a new expansion.
Yeah, because I think I played in 2005 and then took a break to play a bunch of Halo 2. And then and then came back in sort of that lead up to the Lich King coming out. And then I think that's around the time you guys kind of started to get into it, and your dad got into it. And then we played pretty much, I played pretty hardcore, not like super hardcore. I wasn't like raiding or anything, but I played a lot of that game.
Like consistently.
Yeah. Through the entire Lich King expansion and some of Cataclysm. I was there for the launch of Cataclysm and fell off. Like I was at college, like when Cataclysm launched. And so college started happening. And so I had to like do college stuff. And
you gentle listeners can do the math on that.
I was going to say, congrats on graduating a few weeks ago, by the way.
Exactly. And then I've been back various times throughout. I skipped Pandaria, I think, completely. Like I've done stuff in Pandaria just to see it at this point, but I don't think I like really played that expansion. And then I played Legion and Battle for Azeroth, I think. And so like I've been back off and on, but I think Battle for Azeroth was like the last one I really played. I did get the one where you go to their version of like the underworld or whatever. What's that one called, Joe?
Shadowlands?
Yes, I did buy that one, and I played that for like a month or two, but then fell off. So that is where my characters currently are. So
yeah, I think Cataclysm was the fall off point for most of our friend group, with the exception of my dad, who managed to keep going for a little bit longer. And then similar to you, I checked back in at some point. I can't remember what expansion it was. I know Pandas had been out because I was playing Pandas.
I think it was the tail end of Pandas, because that's when I got into it. And I feel like that happened at like a brief resurgence of WoW in the social circle.
Yeah, maybe so. Because like for me, WoW was always super social. I like got on there and chatted with the guild members, and like I was just questing and talking to people pretty much as my gaming experience. I would run dungeons, but like I never got super hardcore into the gameplay of it. And so when I checked back in and did my check-in, and our guild was like super like inactive, and they had like combined servers and like a bunch of things that it was just almost kind of more depressing than if I hadn't have jumped back in at all. And so I was like, yeah. And the few times that I've considered maybe going back or checking in with World of Warcraft again, I just remember like what a time commitment it is / can be, and also that it's a monthly subscription. So I just haven't, and I've never really felt the like call hard enough to get drawn back in, especially now when we live in a world where online gaming and social gaming has caught up with what WoW was back then. Like you can find a different game to be your like hangout game, which was what WoW was for me back in the day. So it's like, I don't need World of Warcraft for that anymore.
Yeah.
What about you, Aubrey? What was your kind of history with WoW back in the day?
Yeah, well, I hopped on whenever everybody was doing it, you know, when it was popular.
Makes it sound like drugs.
I mean, it was all the stories about like people ruining their marriages and losing their jobs because they were addicted to WoW. Yeah.
So I took my warlock up to level 80 whenever that was like the cap level. And I dropped off with Cataclysm because I just didn't like how it totally restructured the world. It was too much change all at once for me. But I did pick back up part of the way through Pandaria. I'm not sure like quite what brought me back, but and I kind of like Andrew, like I would do all of the quests. Like I do all of the quests in a zone. That's what I was into. I somehow did like one raid one time. But it was like an truly insane number of people, and it was, I want to say, one of the like Horde versus Alliance ones because we were like killing Sylvanas or something. So I had no idea what was going on. I'd like queued into something and just was in it, and I just ran around.
Well, there were a few times where our guild tried to like get some raids together and like pull some people through that, you know, and our guild was very much a social, more casual guild. There were some people that were a little bit more hardcore, but yeah, there were, I did do a couple raids with the guild at one point, and it was kind of like, yeah, I don't think this is why I like this game. was kind of my realization.
Well, and I am not typically like a min-maxer or anything along those lines. I, you know, pick and choose, oh, this looks interesting, oh, this looks fun, or this is, you know, this looks neat, or you know, I like this mount type deal. So anytime I would queue up and like if I had a quest that I had to go through a dungeon or something, and especially at like max level, which Pandaria was at the time, they needed me to be a better warlock for the dungeon than I was. So they're like, oh yeah, warlock, you can join our team because like warlocks never get, you know, buffed or anything because they're already the best. Like everybody wants a warlock on their crew. And then you get me who's like, you know, oh, I've taken this skill because it looks fun. And oh, that thing's interesting. And I like that. And I was basically like a one person. Like I had my tank familiar and I could heal it and I could do damage and it would like pull aggro. And we were a great little crew running around the overworld. But then we go into a dungeon. It's like, oh, hey, warlock, drop this buff. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Like, oh, well, can you prep this or do that or whatever? And I'm like, no. I will shadow bolt from here.
Yeah, instancing with strangers was always stressful.
Yeah.
Just as like someone who was casually playing.
Yeah. And so like at that point our guild had completely like fallen off. So it wasn't even a matter of like reaching out to the guild and being like, hey, can I get some help with this? Can we pull together a crew to do this thing? And so yeah, one too many wipes in a dungeon. And I was like, well, I've run out of quests I can do. My little farm is looking very cute on Panda Continent. I think I'm done. And then I haven't really been back since.
And Joe, you picked this bad boy up. I remember when we were younger and we were all super into WoW, your parents wouldn't let you play because of all of the stories about it ruining lives.
They were worried I was going to get addicted.
Little did they know.
So they let me play RuneScape instead. And having watched the life cycle of both MMOs, I can say for a certain fact that RuneScape is far more addictive and time-sinking destructive and produces more like guys who don't go outside than WoW does. WoW just was the first and the high-profile one. But I do remember getting into WoW like in college, and I was playing it, and I kind of had that moment where I was like, what is there to get addicted to? Which, having gone back and played like Burning Crusade Classic and Wrath Classic, the grinds were definitely structured differently. And so I get it. But when I played, or had first started playing, Blizzard had really gotten into the habit of like, most everything was on some sort of weekly lockout. You couldn't just sit there and grind. So it was like, okay, I've done my mythic dungeons. I sent all my garrison missions. What's there to get addicted to? I'm bored. I'm done. I'm gonna close the game now. So yeah, I did start like, it was the end of Mists. I distinctly remember doing Siege of Orgrimmar on like normal difficulty, not really knowing what was going on. I got my legendary cloak, but at that point, like the whole quest line was out and done, so I could just kind of like speed through the catch up on that. Warlords came out. I played Warlords for like 2 months and then said there's nothing to do and unsubscribed. Got back into it later on in Warlords, and then basically have maintained my subscription ever since, except maybe it lapsed for a year in BFA. I definitely was not playing as much. It was right after I finished college, and my work schedule did not let me really raid, and there wasn't like a point in playing if I wasn't raiding, so I may have let the subscription lapse then, but it's been active basically since BFA to now without any break.
Yeah. Wow.
Curious to see how your schedule and your subscription record holds up after the baby's in the house.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably always be subscribed to WoW until it's like gone and done. At this point, it's hard to imagine like truly completely checking out. We'll see. There's a few people in my guild who like they've aged out, but they still stick around. And so I wonder like, can I do that, or am I just gonna have a firm like, nope, that's it, I'm done, I'm out.
Yeah. You transition into like coaching instead of playing the game, you know? Like,
Yeah.
Right. So I know, do you have more? I was going to ask.
Yeah, I guess I could add on there. Like, I definitely got far more involved than anybody else did.
Yeah.
I don't know what drew me into raiding, because there's nothing really like it in like other games I had played. But maybe I think it was just the concept of like killing a big boss kind of drew me in, and specifically like Black Temple and ICC were things like I never did those, but I had heard of them, and that concept sounded really cool. Because World of Warcraft was kind of like Halo back in the day. Like if you just saw like a little bit of Halo 3, you just kind of had that instant like, oh, I want to play that. And World of Warcraft was kind of similar. Like it was, for its time, it was distinct in a way that was immediately like, oh, that's interesting. And then you learn about like, you see the trailer for Wrath of the Lich King, and then you look up some videos and maybe learn the story of Arthas, and you're like, oh, that's really cool. And then you can actually like go in and fight him in a group like that. it sounds kind of cheesy, but when you're, a teenager, you're like, that sounds kind of like epic. So I think when I got into WoW, it was always what I wanted to do. And then I started doing it and had a push to keep going with it. Like, I was never really like, oh, this is like hard or annoying. It was like, no, like I want to see what the game has to offer. I want to stick with it. I remember I looked up a guild on WoW Progress, which is like an ancient site at this point. And I saw like on a loon, there were only like a handful of raiding guilds. And I just like went into trade chat and just asked like if there was anyone from that guild online and like, could I raid with them? Because I had no clue like how that world worked. So I was just like, I'm just going to like ask. And so I got in with them. And once you experience like your first like earned boss kill, it is kind of like the FromSoft feeling of like getting down a hard boss and you're like, oh, like I want to do that again. Like that felt really good.
I was literally thinking of FromSoft as you were talking, because what you're describing sounds cool and I think is what draws me to FromSoft games, except that I don't want to do it with a group of other people and have to schedule it with other people. And so that's why like FromSoft is like the golf equivalent of what you're talking about, whereas you're talking about a team sport, which I don't want to have to do. I would rather do it like just on my own. But I understand the like accomplishing, like crafting like a badass build or whatever and overcoming this challenge in front of you and feeling really good on the other side.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And then, yeah, kind of like golf, you either are happy to just do it on your own for your own enjoyment, or you're like, I want to like show off to other people that I'm good at this and like prove it. And that's the direction I took with WoW. And sort of like it is the social aspect, and it's still something I've never really found replicated in games. Like other MMOs get close, but the guild and the raid team structure is really hard to beat. Because like in other games, you can have other games that are social or have a multiplayer aspect. But that idea of like, I'm going to keep showing up with the same people each week and we're going to work at this month over month. And I mean, it looks different for everybody. Different people have different things they want out of it. But for me at this point, I've been raiding with probably 75% the same group of people since 2020, 2021. Yeah. So like 3 or 4 years now. And so like they are definitely like an online friend group. And so it is like this social club to belong to. I imagine it's probably something similar to like if you did like an adult rec league for like soccer or basketball or something. Like you show up with the same people and do this thing together. But then there's like a highly competitive aspect to it that definitely appeals to me probably more than it would appeal to like any of you guys.
Well, and
That's fair.
I think every time that I think about raiding, just as a concept, I'm like, that seems so cool. That seems like something that I could get super into, just because I like what you're describing. I love the idea of just kind of like hopping in there with 10 or 25 or whatever it is now, like people, and like going through a set of content, especially if you're going through it kind of like you do, where you're doing it sort of on the cutting edge and you're having to like figure out sort of the puzzle of it. Like, I think that's super cool and sounds like a lot of fun. And like you said too, it's kind of like almost like a Dungeons and Dragons sort of thing, where it's like you and your little group of heroes is like progressing through this like big challenging dungeon. And so like that aspect of it I think is super cool. But then it's also like that part of me where it's just like, yeah, but that's a lot of time and commitment, and I don't like, for me personally, it's I wish there was a way I could do that with less and still be flaky, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah, so that's kind of, that was when I started raiding. I was in one of those guilds. Like, I was in a guild with a bunch of Dylans.
Yeah.
We're all like, oh, we want to raid. And then we'd show up to a raid night and there'd
Yep.
be like 6 people there. And
Yeah.
so then the guild master gets on and he's like, look, guys, if you want to raid, you've got to show up. Like, I need to know ahead of time who's going to be here and who's not so we can make a plan.
Yep. It's like,
and that still goes on. And I would say the average raiding guild, when I talk to people who are like happy to just get through heroic and call it, they definitely struggle with kind of the roster boss of people are like, oh, like life's hectic, I can't make raid right now. And then you lose a couple of like critical people. So then you're like, well, now I need to backfill them because we really need a replacement. And then they come back and they're like, hey, where's my raid spot?
Yep.
And that generates endless threads of drama.
Yep. Yeah, I think I could get into raiding now that they have like Raid Finder and just kind of like get in a guild that's only goal is to complete the Raid Finder version of the raid. I could do that, but
you could at least do normal.
Yeah, but I definitely like raiding at the level that you do, which also is like super impressive. I don't think I could. I like being able to like go randomly play a different game if I'm feeling it, versus being like, well, like a bunch of other people are counting. Granted, I played Hunter, so like replacing a DPS is not as critical as replacing like a tank or a healer, but still.
Do you have any consistent hunters in your raid makeup?
Yeah, we have 2 hunters on roster. One's taking a short break, but we're also my guild, I think, is a little bit unique in the bracket we occupy because we have played together for so long that we definitely function as like more of a team and not a collective of individuals who just want loot or just want a spot on the leaderboard. So like, he's taking a break, but we aren't going to like backfill another hunter. Like, if we absolutely have to fill in someone, we will, but our first reaction is like, yeah, of course, take your break, like your spot's here when you get back.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious because we were talking about, the makeup of your crew last time or a couple days ago, and I asked about my class that I made, which was Warlock. I was curious mostly because we just in real life pick on Dylan all the time because his favorite D&D class is a ranger, and I feel like a hunter is very equivalent. So I was curious.
It's just the same thing. You're right.
It's a WoW.
In WoW, it's just as useless as in D&D, or if it's...
How dare you?
It's not as useless, but it's not critical.
Yeah.
If there's any WoW listeners like on this episode, they'll know of the drama of like raid buffs and how that affects like your roster, especially if you have like a fixed size. And hunters have the worst raid buff right now. They have one. Death Knights don't have one at all. But of the classes that have one, hunter is definitely regarded as like, you got the like pat on a back raid buff. Like, here you go. You can have one too.
Here you go,
Yeah, see, I remember playing in Lich King where like they introduced like where number one Beast Mastery was huge and it was like the best hunter class, and then they introduced like I forget what they called them, but like the special beasts that you could tame that would give you like unique things. And so hunters at that time had the ability to also do whatever that like shaman buff was, like heroic or whatever, heroism.
Yeah, hunters can still do heroism or bloodlust. It's just in a raid group, there's like 6 people who can press that button.
Exactly. So, but I think at the time it was like you either had to have a shaman or a hunter with a core hound or whatever.
Yeah, at that point in time, it was unique to shamans, and then they loosened it up because they were like, hey, it's not fun having to always dedicate a spot to a shaman just because of that.
Yeah.
And then for a while, they kind of did away. They gave those unique buffs to like multiple classes, and then they did away with them, but kept like heroism, battle reses were on multiple classes, and then they brought the buffs back. And I think in the next expansion, they're going to get rid of them again, because it's a game that's been out for so long that the dev team has had sufficient churn that they're making the same mistakes over again and relearning the same lessons. Because there's, all of the original gameplay designers who were there when they scrapped raid buffs are probably like somewhere else now.
Yeah.
I kind of want to shift into the recent WoW content. Like the most recent expansion, there was one that came out this year. What are your thoughts on that specifically?
It's another WoW expansion. There's not a ton to say about it as far as
cool.
like,
Moving on. Let's,
this is this like really whiz bang thing that's going to make you come back to the game.
Mhm.
The way they used to be like, Cataclysm was this overhaul of the whole world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All these zones, are now different. Or Mists had the talent rework.
And pandas.
Yeah, and Jack Black.
Warlords, technically the selling point was the garrison. You could play Farmville in WoW, and that was supposed to sell you. Legion sold you on artifact weapons, like you could go and get Ashbringer or Doomhammer, or your class didn't have an iconic weapon, they made something up for you.
Yeah, like hunters.
Yeah,
but
I think that the marksman weapon was
it was
like an iconic bow. But then the other, it's like warlocks. Like one of them got the Skull of Gul'dan, which is this really cool item, and then the other two specs got something.
Yeah, that expansion did work for me. The artifact weapons did bring me back. I was like, that's cool.
Yeah. And you had the class order halls. Like you could go to like you go to True Shot Lodge, I think is the hunter hall. Yeah. And like there's just other hunters there.
True Shot Lodge.
Yeah, it's a very hunter name.
It's adorable.
That was also
Pro Shop.
The expansion you could play as demon hunters, right? Was that?
Yeah, I think they put demon hunters in the game, which is the second to last class that they put out. But lately, it's kind of been a little more subtle. Dragonflight brought back the old style of talent tree. Remains to be seen if that was a good move. But this expansion, they stuck with them, and they basically added sub-specs for those new trees. So it's like kind of some okay flavor, but it's not like no one's resubscribing to the game so that they can be a Deathbringer Death Knight or a pack leader hunter. Like it's there for the people who are already playing.
Yeah.
There's nothing. I'm trying to think if they really did anything with like open world stuff, but it's kind of just more of what's been working for them. There's new zones, there's new quests. Instead of like the reps, instead of being, neutral to exalted, they have a new system called Renown. That's kind of the same thing, but it's a little more granular. Instead of having like these big long gaps between levels, it's a smoother climb up to like, I think it's 25 is the max. And the rewards are shifted to a much more cosmetic angle. You don't have to go and grind out, the Sons of Hodir to get your best in slot gloves. You it's like, oh, I want that mount. Cool. I'll do these activities and then eventually I'll get the mount. I guess the big thing was war bands. So all of your characters are now like in a quote war band, and your characters now all keep track of like what quests have been done on your account. You can transfer almost any currency between characters in your war band. You can send stuff. You can't send bind on pickup items to other members of your war band, but you can send everything else. So if you're someone who likes to play a lot of characters it's now like pretty seamless to just like, oh, I leveled my hunter to the max. I did these quests. Now I'm going to go ahead and level up my shaman, but now I'm going to go do like the side stuff in this other zone over here, and I'll get all the rep from that, and all of my characters will get that rep. So for people who like play multiple characters, WoW is finally at this place where it's like you can just hop over to whatever sounds fun to actually play, and you don't log in and sit there and go, oh, but I have to go do this quest line, and then I have to farm this thing, and I got to do that. Okay, and then he'll be ready to play. You know, it's like South Park, like now we finally play the game. So they really made like playing multiple characters smoother.
Yeah.
And I think kind of at like the level like you guys would mainly engage with it, they've done a lot of appealing towards people who want to log in, they want to farm their appearances, get this set, collect all the achievements or something, but aren't looking, they don't want to go and like do a mythic raid just to, you know, get the look they want to get. Like obviously there's still certain appearances that are locked to that, but I get the impression that if you're a achievement hunter, a mount farmer, you just like getting transmog. Each expansion lately, the game's been getting better and better at providing like a smoother experience for you. And the making everything account wide, I think, is kind of the ultimate like step in that, because if you're trying to get all the mounts, it's going to be a lot easier to do it on multiple characters. And so you want to have those characters be seamless to hop between. And that's kind of what they've done with this expansion.
Yeah. Yeah. So
It's pretty clever.
they've done a lot to try to make it appeal, like make the casual experience a lot better, it sounds like.
I would say they really look at a lot of this, the minor annoyances, and kind of smooth those over so that when you're playing the game, you're not thinking about like the annoying quirks of it being an MMO, and your focus is on just doing the thing that you want to do.
Which is impressive too, because like you've said, you know, it's 20 years old. It's a game that I would imagine there is so much just like old code and old stuff and systems that are the way that they are, because if we change it, we break everything sort of scenarios. So
yeah,
it's impressive.
They definitely hit those, but I don't know how much it resonates beyond the people who are playing like every single day and will notice. I think if you just play like a few times a week, a lot of those get fixed quickly enough, or just kind of to you, they're like, I don't see why that's really that big an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm just saying too, it's impressive that they keep innovating and changing and like smoothing things out, because I think a lot of other MMOs would just be like, we can't change this because when we do, it breaks DPS. So
they're doing it faster than they've ever done it before, and they have like multiple streams of WoW going at the same time, where between classic hardcore, classic season of discovery, there's they've never put out like so much WoW at once, and there's definitely like signs that they struggle with it a little bit, but so far it's still rolling.
Yeah. So how would you rate like this expansion that just came out this year? You know, was it what you wanted as a like longtime WoW player, or did you find yourself wanting some more?
Well, I'm in the segment of the player base that is never satisfied.
Fair.
So I'm always wanting more.
Yeah. I
would say the expansion launch itself and the first couple of weeks, and most of the time, it's always good. And it was good this time. Like expansion launch, it's always great. The questing feels good. You're like, oh, this is cool and this is new and this is nice. So like what makes an expansion good or bad doesn't come out until like month 6, 8, 12.
Okay. So we're rolling up on that then, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
And kind of my overall opinion is like, it's pretty solid. There's nothing really majorly wrong with it. I'm playing it just for the enjoyment of it, maybe more than usual. Like I don't hit that point where I'm like, great, I'm done with Raid for the week. My Death Knight, he's set. I've done all I can. Closing WoW, and I'm not thinking about it until Tuesday. It's like, oh, actually, like I want to, go play this alt or play that alt or go look at this quest line over here that's purely just for fun. So in that respect, like it's pretty good. In the realm that I care about it kind of depends on who you ask. And it all really comes down to like class balance and design. For everything the art team does, the quest designers do, the rewards team, I would say at least half, if not more, of the fun of WoW is determined by a small team of class designers and how good they do on making classes that are satisfying to play and keeping balance within a decent range of balance. It's never going to be perfect, but they can try to keep it as close as they can. And they've done decent this expansion as far as keeping the bottom level like up. Like the bottom specs aren't too far away from the mid-tier specs, but the top end specs are like a mile ahead of everyone else. And they haven't done like a particularly great job on handling that.
Yeah.
And it's led to some not awesome dynamics where like the expansion launched and like Death Knights were really good, and specifically Frost Death Knights, which is the spec I write for, came out really strong. And we went from last expansion, we were like the second least played spec in the game to like almost the most played, like almost overnight. And we're really strong, and suddenly everyone goes like, hey, how come this class is good? They shouldn't be good. I should be good. And we kind of knew they were going to nerf us. And then because they're doing this like 8-week patch cycle, they had already reworked one of our subspecs. But when they reworked it, they didn't tune it. They just threw it out there like, hey, we're going to rework these things. And I do the theory crafting for the spec. And so I modeled out the changes. And then I looked and was like, oh, this is going to be kind of a significant buff, especially in AoE. And then word got out that, oh, next reset, Frost Death Knights are getting buffed. That's outrageous. Why are they getting buffed? They're insane. And so then Blizzard kind of does the knee-jerk thing of like, uh-oh, people are mad. We're not just going to nerf the thing that we accidentally buffed, but we're then going to nerf the spec even further beyond that. And so like for me personally, it went from, oh, great, my spec's like finally the flavor of the month. Like I'm going to get to be in for like every raid fight. Like this is, I'm never going to struggle to find a dungeon group. Like this is awesome. Like it feels good when you're flavor of the month. And then like overnight, it's like, oh yeah, actually we're kind of like middle to lower end of the pack now. And it's still fine for the things I want to do. But it's like, there is that annoyance of, why did you, the game designers, not catch this sooner? And particularly with Blizzard, there's a really weird, touchy community relationship that got to be in the state that it's in before I really got deeply involved, and I understand why it is that way. But at the same time, there is still sort of this frustration on like, man, this thing that like I think about a bunch and like engage with for like an enjoyment perspective is getting like yanked around by someone who's here on their 9 to 5. And I'm not saying that they don't care, but like, I know they don't have the manpower on their class team to have someone who's like, I just think about Death Knights, and I'm going to really think about like, how do we go about doing these changes in the right way? Their class team, from every indication, is woefully understaffed. They don't have enough people to give every class like good attention. And so your experience is really shaped by, did I get lucky and did a dev give me good attention this last patch cycle, or the previous one? And if you're not in that group, you're not having as good a time, and you're looking at the specs that did get changed.
Yeah.
And so that's like, it's a weird niche thing, and I don't know how far down the player base like that resonates, or if they just go, you know, oh, I'll play Ret Paladin or I'll play Beastmaster because that's what everyone plays, and you know, they don't carry beyond that. But at my level, it's definitely like the thing that would take this to the top is if they would give classes the proper attention and iterate on them and show a little more transparency on, here's the feedback we're getting and here's our answer to it. Right now it's very, I write forum posts and say, here's what I'm seeing as a player, and maybe they take that, maybe they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there are definitely other games out there where you know that if you're engaged on that level as a player, you're going to get some like dev interaction and some dev responses.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything we would know, like all of us would know that's to that level. Obviously not a FromSoft game.
Yeah. No, they're just
they're not going to tell you a thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I feel like maybe something like what are those ones that always get shouted out at the Game Awards for like their community interact? Like Final Fantasy 14 seems like maybe one that does stuff like that, but I don't know how much any of us, or 16, I forget which game it is.
Yeah, 15.
14.
No, 14's the MMO one.
Yeah. But like
Warframe.
Yeah.
Warframe is like real big in how they listen and respond to their community.
Yeah. I know the one that comes to my mind is Diablo 3, but it's also a Blizzard game where it's also very like touchy with the
Is
or
WoW
4.
still currently the biggest MMO, or have they been passed up?
It's not, nobody knows for sure.
Mhm.
It's either them or 14, probably.
I would say WoW. There was a moment where 14 had a real shot at overtaking WoW. That's passed. But I can't think.
Blizzard, they've got so many games that are so big and so like perpetually running and updating and shifting and, you know,
they've got at least
adjusting and
3.
tweaking and fine tuning. Well, and with big player bases, that I can imagine that community management on that scale is impossible. But it would also make sense to like, I don't know, try and engage with, not that you want to like, you know, oh, you know, the elite people are the people who really care, stuff like that. But like, obviously, like the Wowhead team is, you know, you're doing the theory crafting, you're building the guides, you're thinking about it, you're looking deeply into what these characters are. It feels like there should be some kind of communication with people engaging in the game at that level, at least, to like, hey, like, what are you seeing? What do you feel? Or like sending out surveys or polls or something, you know? Like, obviously, you cannot please everybody, especially when your audience is millions of people strong. But I can see the frustration of being somebody who's so dialed in on that specific aspect and seeing the people that control it not engaging with it as much as you, like the person who's just consuming it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you said community management, and that's the thing that Blizzard really lacks, especially on WoW, especially on the modern WoW. Classic WoW has an okay amount of dev interaction and some back and forth. Kind of their main guy used to take to Twitter a lot to like answer questions about, we're doing this, we're doing that. That kind of dried up. I had heard that he maybe went off on somebody on social media, and the company was like, maybe you don't do that.
No.
But Blizzard employees have
That's
also
fair.
kind of had a weird relationship with social media where Blizzard has a really lax policy and lets them get away with anything, and then someone pushes it too far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then they clamp down on, but they don't have any community managers really left. Like I think they have a few people with that title,
Yeah.
but under Activision, they fired most of them and never replaced them. So
Mhm.
like,
because
if I go to the official WoW forums and go to like the Death Knight section, it's completely unmoderated. Like
wow.
it just descends into flame wars in the discussion threads, and so the official forums are kind of regarded as a joke because it's like, oh, there must not be anyone reading these. Now we know they do. Somehow someone reads them and those suggestions get to the devs, because we will see very specific suggestions from forum threads end up making its way into the game. And I'm not saying like, oh, Blizzard should listen to me. I know what's best because I am looking at things through a very narrow lens. And they've got a design for a broader audience. It would just be nice to know, like, hey, we read this.
Yeah.
You're not just shouting into the void.
I mean, hell, even EA would send like messages and surveys out of like, hey, rate 1 to 5 what you think of this idea for The Sims 4. Like, what would you like to see? What seems interesting? And obviously, wildly different game. Them throwing knitting into The Sims 4 is nothing like, balancing a class. But even just like that level of, again, community engagement of, what are you liking? What are you not liking? What would you like to see more of? Like, rather than either working totally blind or sifting through the official forums where there are like flame wars and agitation or, whatever, bubbles up to the top or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. But I love data. I love collecting data. So I'm sure not everybody thinks the way I do.
It's definitely tough. It's a tough balance because Joe isn't like the 1% of WoW players, or maybe 5%. And so, like you said, they have to cater to a broad audience. The other side is like, there are games like I mentioned Warframe that is kind of renowned for actually being like having a good relationship with their community and like growing the game in a direction that the community wants. But then there's games like Marvel Snap, which I'm like really big into. And they send out like these surveys about like, what do you want to see in this game? And your feedback's so important to us and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, all they do is just continue to make the like progression and the store and stuff of that game more predatory and like more of a dumpster fire. So it's like, it's superficial, the kind of garbage that they're putting out as far as like wanting community feedback. So there's just like this really just, it's such a tough balance. And I see where Joe is coming from as like the diehard lifeblood of this game and its community and like being really deep in the trenches. But also like, we're talking about Blizzard Activision, which is now owned by Xbox and is going through like all sorts of its growing pains and industry issues that are happening now too. So it's like, there's so much more to this equation.
Looks like for a Blizzard employee.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like, it's just, there's so many things to kind of take into consideration, and it's unfortunately very rare in the games, and it doesn't happen on like a large corporate scale. It happens more on like that indie to like AA mid-tier. Like Warframe's probably about as big as they could probably ever get and still maintain their like reputation of being so so connected to their community, because once it gets beyond that into the like Activision Blizzard Xbox level of corporatization, I don't know that those kind of companies can really, I don't know of any of them that have done a good job of being in touch with their community, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Which feels kind of funny to say, because you'd think with more resources they could,
But it's
That
not
almost
about
makes it
resources
worse
that,
because
it's not about resources. It's about bottom line. At that point, everything becomes a number, including players, and like everything is just a number. You don't see people as people anymore. You don't see players as like, everything is just a number, and it's all about making the profit number as big as possible and the cost number as low as possible. And that's like the target. And so when that becomes the only thing that you care about, you lose sight of actually like putting the player first and taking their feedback into consideration and making that like an important, valued part of your development process.
Yeah, a good example of that is Blizzard outsourced their customer support. Like most tickets, if you're like a weird bug happened to you in game and you're like trying to get it fixed, Blizzard has a reputation that back in the day, like you would get an actual person sitting in an office on the Blizzard campus, and they might like log into the game and just like fix the quest for you, or like
I literally
give you
did that
item.
I did that back in the day in Lich King. I don't remember if I lost gold or what the weird issue was, but you could just kind of like pull up like a help tab, like a chat thing in game. And I really did feel like I was talking to an actual person that was like looking through my logs and like looking at my past history of like, in the time frame that the thing had happened that I was reporting. And like, it genuinely felt like somebody on the other side that was trying to get to the bottom of my issue and make it right.
Yeah, they were legendary for that. Like they had the best customer support out there, and it got degraded over time as basically just layoffs happen, and then it's been outsourced. I think they still have game masters, but you have to put in a ticket like 4 times to get it escalated to a game master. Most of the tickets you put in go to some outsourced center. They reply to you off a script. They don't have access to the in-game tools as far as I know to actually help you. They'll just tell you to go read a fan site most of the time. Which they do have like less of those like kind of game-breaking bugs.
Yeah.
Right.
These days, but it's still like if you do hit those, you don't have a ton of recourse. And it's because they did the business calculus and went, you know what? It costs us more money to maintain this team of game masters than we're making up for in like kept subs. Basically,
right. If those people quit playing, it'll be a less of a loss as opposed to
they're like, we don't think
enough
enough people
salary
are going to hit a bug and quit playing to make up for 50 people's salaries, so let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me sad.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, when you get that big,
Yeah, I get it, but also like, damn, that's a shame.
Becomes a business. And it's all about the bottom dollar. I mean, you see it with like when I worked for Walmart, there were all these old timers there that were like, man, when the Waltons were still in charge, or when Sam Walton was still alive, like this is a great company to work for. They actually cared about the employees and all this stuff. And then, it just goes down. The bigger the company gets, it becomes more and more about the numbers and about profit, and the business becomes too big to fail, which I think that Blizzard and WoW especially like definitely hit that point where they were like, we're the biggest game on the planet, like we can just coast. And then I think they definitely had a bit of a reality check at some point and have had to like put a bit more effort into things. But I do think they hit that point where they were just like, whatever we do, it'll sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a captive audience in that lane. Like no one's ever beat World of Warcraft in the MMO space.
Yeah.
And so, especially like for the gameplay I do, this comes up a lot of the time is, people will get mad about Blizzard doing this or that, and they're so dumb. How can they do this? Like the typical gamer rants. I'm sure you guys have seen in other games, and it's like, okay, unsubscribe. Like they don't care that you're mad. Like I'm sure someone at Blizzard, the people working on the game, like they see that and they do care, and so you shouldn't just vent about it too. Like, think about the person who is working on it and does care. But like, it just the company as a whole is like, I'm not concerned if you're mad. I'm concerned if you're mad enough to stop playing. And that does happen
Or
from
stop
time to
paying.
time. Well, yeah.
Wow, you could stop playing and
cancel
still be
your
paying your
subscription.
sub. Yeah.
And not buy the next expansion. And certainly, like, yeah, every once in a while, there's that hardcore raider who's like, screw this. Whatever this latest thing was is too much. I'm done.
Yeah.
But Blizzard's basically decided that that's an acceptable level of churn. But in things that people will go, how are they not fixing this? The whole player base is mad. And I'm like, even if the whole Mythic rating player base is mad, they're not going anywhere. This is the only game where they can get this kind of experience. Final Fantasy is the closest, but even then, they never like managed to eclipse WoW. And even the people who do go to Final Fantasy are like, yeah, it's similar, but it's distinctly different, and it doesn't scratch the same itch. You may find a new itch, and you may prefer that to WoW, but it's not going to like replace it.
Yeah.
So do we want to shift into questions specifically for Joe and like how he has taken his passion for World of Warcraft and grown it beyond the game?
Yeah.
No, let's keep talking about this depressing topic. Let's linger here longer.
I do think that
there's plenty that can be said about,
it's not depressing, it's pragmatic.
No, I'm an optimist.
I do
I
think
don't like
that
looking at the world as it is.
The topic of, talking about the games industry and games company and corporations and like player bases and all that is interesting. And it's definitely, we are in a turning point / transition period. I feel like we had the COVID boom for gaming, which made the corporations feel like they were invulnerable and made them like overextend their reach. And now we're in a kind of a place where like we're seeing layoffs happen. We're seeing all sorts of other things happen. We're seeing people start to like the vote with your wallet thing is always thrown around, but I feel like we're actually starting to kind of see that actually happen much more realistically and effectively with like big companies like Ubisoft, like putting out broken games that are essentially copy paste formulas of their other games and them not meeting their sales expectations and then having to like adjust and decide what they want to do with that. And so I do think that, it's an interesting thing to discuss, but I also think that it's kind of a broader topic that we don't necessarily need to like dissect on this episode, especially when we have the World of Warcraft Death Knight Frost spec expert in the house, and we can talk to him about how he has. All of us enjoyed WoW when it was like the biggest it was ever going to be, and we had friends playing it and we hung out in it, but Joe has taken his passion and enjoyment for this game and not only just kind of maintained his like high level gameplay experience over the past few years, but is now like writing for Wowhead and doing theory crafting and all that kind of stuff. So I think it would be a good idea. It'd be interesting to kind of discuss that here, for a little bit
about something specific to him.
Yeah, exactly. Especially on this episode, like Joe's definitely going to end up back on the podcast at some point, but like every time we're like, hey, Joe, plug what you're doing. And he's like, well, your audience probably doesn't care. This is the episode specifically for his audience. So,
so let's get specific.
Yeah, Aubrey, start it off.
What is theory crafting?
I'm going to say, Aubrey, what's it like being married to a man who has deadlines outside of work?
Well, let's see. The extra income is nice. The topic can be tricky to parse sometimes, but I listen for keywords and put them in questions that I ask back to you so we can actually have a conversation about it.
Wait, why are we asking Aubrey questions? What happened? Hold on. We're talking to Joe.
I was trying to set Aubrey up for a joke about that 2-week span when I don't come to bed before 2:00.
Most of the time, I just go to sleep.
Yeah, I said I don't know that you noticed.
Smart choice.
So I guess theory crafting as just a broad concept. It's The pedantic answer is it's what's in the name. It's crafting a theory about how to accomplish something in the game. Colloquially, it's doing math on what build to play.
So is this something that's like really specific and like big in WoW, like specifically, or is this something that happens across other games as well? We just may not be tuned into it.
It happens to a much more intense level in WoW than in other games.
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking.
WoW offers a level of insight into how it works that other games don't. And part of that is it's been around for 20 years, and what we don't have insight into, people have reverse engineered. And so there's a level of understanding on what drives the game that, like, Elden Ring theory crafting is going to struggle to come up against. But it still works kind of the same in Elden Ring. Just maybe it's a little more fuzzy, where you kind of sit down and go, okay, how does strength affect my weapon damage? How does dexterity affect my weapon damage? How does this charm buff my weapon? And so you'll come up with like, okay, so if I put all of this on, each swing does this much damage, or maybe I'm looking at a string of combos and it does this much damage.
So it's like optimizing a build mathematically.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Like I saw someone post...
It's like those people that go in and they put like 7 buffs on their character and then they one-shot a boss on like...
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up was someone did that to the last boss of Shadow of the Erd Tree. They just kept spamming their combo, and it was like each time it was like 7,000 damage. And the title was "You don't have to be good, you just have to be smart," because he never dodged. He never he understood how the boss worked, obviously, to do that. But like,
right,
you know, it wasn't like Millennia where you're like, oh, I've got to have really good reflexes and position carefully and all that stuff. He's like, no, if I just look at all of my tools available to me, I can come up with something that lets me just not fight him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In WoW, it's similar but different and it depends on if you're a tank, if you're a healer, or if you're DPS. If you're DPS, you do all of your theory crafting off of a program called Simulation Craft, which has been around since Wrath of the Lich King. So this is a software project that's about 15 years old, so it's been around a while and a lot of work has gone into it. That's a program that models, basically the way it's mostly used, it's a program that models what happens when you stand there and test out your rotation on a target dummy. But it does this, and then it does it a few thousand times or more, so that you kind of get this average DPS that fits on a normal distribution, just like a bell curve. And then you can go, okay, so now what if I change this talent? What does my DPS do? What if I put on this trinket? What does my DPS do? What if I get more haste? What does my DPS do? And so that's kind of like the basis for theory crafting. I take it a step further. I write the code for simulation craft, which means going beyond just what happens if I do this, but is how do all of these spells interact with each other? If I have this buff, does it buff this other thing? When this expires, what happens? And that all goes into code logic to build an accurate as possible model. Now, in game, you're almost never just sitting there hitting a dummy, but the amount of work it would take to like model every single boss fight is just so high that no one's like, I want to do that. Because then you also have to model your inputs for every single boss fight in the game. And kind of where the community has converged on is these dummy tests using this particular input that's like a priority list of spells to use, and that's like its own script syntax. And so like I also do that for Frost Death Knight. Another guy used to do it. up until like this past 6 months to a year. He did a very good job on it. I just started taking a bigger role in it since I was writing for Wowhead, and was like kind of I want to do more of this, and I want to make sure I am earning my keep, because like my guide writing is a paid thing, but all this theory crafting is purely volunteer. And so you don't want to be that guy who just sits back and lets someone else do all the hard work and then reads what they came up with and goes, great, it's in a guide, I'll take my check. It's more complicated than that, obviously. Writing the guide is its own skill set, its own work, but there is definitely like a let's make sure no one feels like someone else is profiting off their work dynamic to it.
Yeah. I'd imagine it probably helps make it easier to write those guides too. When it sounds like you, through doing all this stuff, you probably understand what is going on with Frost Death Knights at a much deeper level.
Yeah, that is another reason I do what I do. And it's because if there's all of the like modeling it in code, and then there's just sitting there with the simulator going, what if I do this? No, that doesn't work. What if I do that? Nope, that doesn't work. And by trying all of these things that don't work, for me at least, you develop this kind of like understanding of what makes the spec tick.
Yeah, like you're seeing the code in the Matrix where it's like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
I just have to put on this cloak or whatever, and
it is yeah. Like I don't even see code anymore. I don't even simulate my own character half the time, because I've done so many that I'm like, I know what the outcome here is before like I've run it. And it's, I guess it's to shift back towards what is it? It is fundamentally just basically asking why over and over again. Like, why does this happen? Why is this stat better? To try and like optimize a build. But I've run with it to like an extreme level beyond just the normal, like, you know, in Wayfinder, you might theory craft a build by like, oh, this stat, I think I want mostly this stat. And then you'll stack that stat and you'll go, yeah, I think I'm doing more damage now. Okay. And like, that's all you need to do for that game. But WoW, I guess, has such momentum behind it that the level to get started in theory crafting and to not just be retreading the ground that everyone else has tread, you've got to get really into it. It's not 100% related to this, but I do want to plug a video called "It's Rude to Suck at World of Warcraft." It's like an hour and a half. It's a long watch, but it's really good.
Yep.
Because it analyzes the way a community gets consumed or controlled by things outside the game. So what Aubrey was talking about, like, Warlock, drop this buff, and you're like, I don't know what that is. And your group expected you to know what that was. They've expected you read the guide and know what's going on. And that's just a general expectation across WoW. You're not allowed to come up with your own build. You've got to go with a theory crafted build. And this video like really delves into how that happened.
Yeah.
And as an interesting look at things, maybe just to me because I'm in it. And now that I write for Wowhead, I'm arguably part of the problem because I'm the guy who people go, why are you playing your Frost Death Knight that way? The guide on Wowhead says you should play this build. And so like that, and that factors into how I write the guide, because now I have to walk kind of this tightrope of the vocal part of my audience wants me to be optimal. They want the theoretical best thing I can find. They want to play to the tip-top level. The guide needs to be as optimal as possible. Every little optimization, every slight DPS gain from swapping a talent. And they're the ones who are going to ping me on Discord if they're like, why didn't you put this build as the best one? It should be this one. There's a much bigger and silent audience that's like, I want to play Frost Death Knight, but I look at this talent tree and I don't want to think about it. So they go to Wowhead and click on the first build and import it into the game and just play.
Mm-hmm.
That's mostly who's going to read the guide. And so there's like, well, the build should be friendly to them.
Yeah.
And I also, when I recommend like, play this build, don't play this build, there's a sort of a like, here's what's optimal, but here's also what else is out there, because there's some people, they don't want to play what's optimal. They want to play what they like.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like there's a
Do you really-
difference. I remember when I was playing Beast Mastery Hunter. I'd been playing Beast Mastery Hunter for a long time just because it was the one I personally enjoyed the most. And there was a shift. Like for a while there, pretty much all of the specs in Hunter were pretty equal. Like it didn't really matter which one you played. And then for a bit, it was like, nope, survival way outshines these other two. And so it was one of those weird things where it was like, the level of content that I was doing, it didn't matter what build I was running because I wasn't trying to do like top tier raids or whatever. So any of them would do. But at the same time, there's that part of you that's like, well, this one's technically the best and I want to feel like I'm doing the best, but I don't enjoy this one, I see that a lot too in like the Diablo 4 community where, it's like, oh, I want to play Barbarian. This is the best Barbarian build, but I don't like it. It's not fun. I want to play the fun one, And so I definitely get kind of what you're saying where it's like, there's that balance.
And in a game like that, it's like, well, I'm not hurting anyone if I want to play my Barbarian build. But then in World of Warcraft, it's like, oh, well, now my group's mad at me because I'm making the dungeon take longer. And there's a weird pressure there. And so it's a little bit tricky when you kind of get into that world of theory crafting of here's what's best, but it's by such a slim margin. So how do I communicate this is the best option I found, but here's what's practical?
Yeah. Well, and I imagine too, like there's some level where it's like, yes, if you are playing this as optimally as you can, then yes, this is technically better and to a significant degree. But I would imagine 95% of players are not playing it optimally. It's one of those where it's like, yeah, if you're hitting all of your cooldowns exactly right, sure. You're not going to do that, though, because you're just a casual player, So you're actually doing less damage than if you had just played this other build that was slightly easier, quote unquote, So.
Right. And that's its own kind of like topic in the community is, oh, Wowhead says this, but, that's not realistic. Play this instead. Which is very like, you talk about like a 1% of a 1% topic.
Yeah.
Because, again, most people who are playing, when they look at Wowhead, they just go and look at it and pick the build and close it. And maybe they play for a bit and go, I don't like that. And then they change it. Which, by the way, is like what you should do.
Yeah.
I don't get my feelings hurt if you think I should change. Like, if you don't like what I picked and you think something should be swapped, my feelings don't get hurt. Like, go ahead. I'm providing people a starting point. I'm not reaching through the screen and making them pick certain talents, which I do feel like sometimes people need to be reminded about.
Yeah, just because you're presenting this as the optimal option doesn't mean it's the only one or even the best one for everybody. Do you think, you were pretty in the weeds even before like starting to write for Wowhead. Has that impacted how you interact with the game at all? Or is it just like kind of one more thing you do now?
It definitely has. I think the kind of the being in the weeds thing, even before Wowhead, I worked on the simulator. here and there. I wasn't like the main guy doing it for Death Knights, but I chipped in here and there. And that was more, honestly, more of like a professional development thing. I found that I can't code outside of work on productive things, because it's like, make a side project. And it's like, what do you make? Like, what real world thing can I think of and accomplish that's actually useful that hasn't been done? But then it's like, do you want to program this thing for a video game? And all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, I understand video games. Like, is it useful? No, but it's interesting and fun. So it was a great way to get me to like code outside of work and learn new things. And even through like, as I got involved in Wowhead, it was like, oh, this is kind of weirdly like independent research and experimenting that's like weirdly fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I didn't realize that I enjoyed that until I started like doing it. And then after I started writing for Wowhead, there was definitely a sense of like, now that I'm making some income from writing for the game, which it's not required that I play the game at the level I do to write for Wowhead. There are guide writers who like don't even raid, and they still write excellent guides. They maybe need some extra help on the raid tip section, but as far as clearly explaining the rotation and talents and all that stuff, like, you can do just fine and not play at the level I play at. But there is an enjoyment of like, oh yes, I like seeing how the theory crafting interfaces with actually playing the game, and like what theories pan out, what theories don't. You know, kind of, okay, using the theory crafting to inform the game, and then using the game to inform the theory crafting, and having to write those findings and then present them to people makes it tangible in a way that makes me go, yeah, like I want to keep playing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And keep playing to experience like different aspects of the game, so I understand like what's out there and what my audience might be experiencing, so then I can write a better guide for them, because most of my audience doesn't play at the level I play at. I tend to assume that most people who play at the level I play at don't read my guide. A few of them I think do, but there's also like kind of, once you've played WoW long enough, most of the specs aren't that hard.
Mm-hmm.
You've learned the patterns, you kind of learn how they work. You don't need to read a guide to figure out kind of what to play. Or you just look at like the bleeding edge guilds and copy what they do.
Yeah.
I'm definitely like writing for people who are less into the game, and so it's like, okay, what's the game like for them? How can I experience it through their eyes so the guide content is like better catered for them?
Yeah.
Now, Joe, you mentioned Wayfinder earlier. When are we going to party up?
Some night when we're both free.
Okay.
And maybe when I've like finished the hand-holding tutorial part, they're like, go here, do this, talk to this person. I
Fair
think
enough.
I'm just about done with it. They introduced me to all the vendors. I maybe have to do like one more of the like dungeon things, and then I'll be
Nice.
like out on my own. It hasn't like grabbed me yet, but I haven't stopped playing it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bit of the tutorial initial stuff, and then it's like similar to a Monster Hunter or anything else, where it's like go into these instances and grind for the stuff for the character you like to make them as powerful as possible. So
I figure at some point it'll get some momentum, and I'll get into the hook. It's just getting there. I'm like, this is a lot of information.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of just world building and exposition.
Yeah.
They have to explain why everything is the way it is.
And why did this dungeon drop me 20 different things?
Yeah. So as far as WoW, do you guys have any other questions for Joe that you want to pick his brain on before we wrap this thing up?
What is, in your opinion, the coolest mount you have?
The coolest mount I have is, I would say, it's hard to know, like, how
Does
to,
it get
like,
cooler than the just Death Knight horse?
though
Like
there's
the Warlock horse.
Death Knight horses that are more Death Knight. I would say Baron Rivendare's Charger, because I just luckily got that very early, and I still have it like on a pretty easy to get to bind. I did get the Headless Horseman's mount this year. That one's cool.
Nice.
Sweet.
The coolest mount I don't have is the new Death Knight horse that they didn't let players just have. They put it in the like Karazhan 2 dungeon, and it drops at a very low rate, and I've never gotten that.
Mm.
And that one, that's my white whale.
Yeah.
The current.
Nice.
Which one did you have the most fun getting? Because the last thing I remember doing in WoW was that like island with all of the like gear drops and stuff on Pandaria, and then also all of the daily quests to try and get a dragon in Pandaria. And I think I did eventually manage to get one.
Yeah, so they last year, or was it this year? It was this year. They did this event for the pandas where you played a character locked to pandas. You leveled it up there, and then at max level, you basically kind of got like insanely powerful, and then would go run through the content and get the special currency, and then you could buy like old mounts and transmogs from Panda without having to like farm out the really low drop chances.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did, I think it was like the achievements for that event, you got a gold astral serpent, which the astral serpent mount is the like serpent dragon that looks like a constellation from way back in the day. There's a gold reskin of that, and I like that mount, and I also liked what I did to get that mount.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was a good time.
Nice.
All right, I'm satisfied.
What would you, so it may be time and place, it may be because you really just enjoyed the content. What would you say is your favorite expansion WoW has had so far that you've played?
Favorite so far? That's tough. It's going to be tough to not be blinded by nostalgia.
Yeah. I mean,
Dragonflight was pretty good.
Yeah.
Legion, I remember Legion fondly. Legion did not start out good. I think if I look at just last patch of Legion, it's Legion.
Yeah. Okay.
There was just a lot to do. There was a lot of casual content, like decent raids, good dungeons. In terms of time and place thing, Dragonflight would be like, I think that's when I just had the most fun with the game.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Cool. Well, Joe, thank you for coming on this episode, sharing your insights into WoW on a much deeper level than the three of us could ever hope to achieve. And in your experience writing and all the extra stuff you do outside of just the game itself. This is usually the part of the episode where we transition into housekeeping, but before we get there, I'm going to give you an opportunity to plug. You've mentioned obviously that you write for Wowhead, so like if you have anything that you want to shout out or plug, keeping in mind that this episode out of any of our others will probably speak to your community more than any of the others you've been on.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
So if you do play a Death Knight and want to play Frost, I do have a couple of short guides on my YouTube channel, and that can be found at KhazakDK, KhazakDK. And I keep saying I'm going to make more guides soon. It's just a matter of like sitting down and actually doing it.
Yes, I feel that.
But every time I'm about to, I think about how long it takes to edit a video. And I'm like, nah, I want to, but I don't want to.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Well, as far as the effing gamers, we recently wrapped up our Game Swap month last month and are now moving into our end of the year content. We will be doing our Game Awards episode based around the Game Awards event, Jeff Keighley's Game Awards. We will also be doing our own FN Game Awards that we've done ever since this show started. So we'll be doing that. Aubrey will be included this year for the first time. We'll be doing our predictions wrap up and new predictions for the upcoming year. We'll be doing our fantasy critic prediction, or not predictions, but recap and talking about the disaster that was this year in Fantasy Critic, and so all that kind
disaster.
of stuff.
How dare you?
All that kind of stuff is coming up in the end of the year for the podcast. Generally speaking, it's like my favorite time of year as far as like the episodes that we get to make. Like I really like this time of year as far as the gaming community and what we talk about on the podcast. So I'm excited about that. I hope you all are too. Dylan, what's going on YouTube?
So we recently had a video about some under the radar games that you may not have tried. If you want to hear what Andrew thinks, you should maybe check out, because he is kind of our resident expert on like random AA games that are much better than they have any right to be. Maybe check that video out. And, leave a comment on it about some other ones that maybe he didn't include in that list. And then we've got a video coming out this week. I don't know what it is yet because we were recording this a bit early. And also, it'll likely just kind of be whatever grabs my fancy at the time. But there will be a video that comes out later this week.
And Aubrey, any random closing tidbits that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, if you replace your headlights from like the stock version to some LED bright ass bullshit, at least make sure they're pointing in the right direction. We live in the South and the yee trucks are bad enough as it is. It's bad enough that you're jacked up, but it's even worse when apparently you have them pointing directly at us even if your brights aren't on. Also, if you're a young person, make sure you're not just turning your brights on instead of like turning your headlights on, because I swear to God, some of you people don't know what that is. They're too damn bright. It's getting darker sooner. Some of these roads are risky enough without the kind of malarkey you guys are doing to your vehicles. So please, for the love of God, make my life a little bit better. And the life of other, people with the souls of 80-year-olds on the road better.
Cool. Well, with that, Joe, thanks again for joining us to talk about your second job / favorite game of all time. And for everybody who has listened to this episode, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We will catch you on the next one.